This session is about APIs, so I'm going to go from anywhere if you're a beginner to intermediate, if you're a pro. Hopefully you'll still get some information out of this as well. So first of all, I want to welcome you. This is a large crowd, so thank you. Again, I want everybody to walk away with something by the end of today. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what an API is. Some of you might have seen an API call, maybe some of the data that's been returned on an API call. And maybe some of you have already worked with APIs, maybe you work with API keys. So hopefully we'll go through all of that. I'm Chad Kluck. I work at the University of St. Thomas in the libraries. I'm a web developer. I'm not a librarian by profession. I'm a web developer. But I have been in the information side of at St. Thomas for about 15 years. I've been with the library for about 3 years. I'm basically the only developer on staff at the library. We do have other people who are technologically knowledgeable. Some people know regex. Some people manage the Alma system from the library side, from circulation as well as collection management. But I'm pretty much the only web developer that there is. And I have other people that help me out in terms of being able to update the website and stuff. I mainly focus on back-end coding as well as some of the user interface things there. So when I talk about Alma APIs, I'm really going to be talking about the user APIs, bib records, things that we would present to users either on the website, their profile, and stuff like that. So first off, I'd like to know what is everybody's experience level so far. So in terms of how many have used an API, it doesn't need to be Alma, Ex Libris, Primo, it just could be Google or anything like that. How many have used an API before? Okay, good. Good number. How many have actually created an Ex Libris API key for integration with another system, whether it be acquisitions or Spinomatic? All right, a few. All right. And how many have at least looked at the API documentation for Ex Libris? All right. So a few more have done that. Maybe the first time you look at it, you're like, you know what, this is too heavy for me right now. I'll come back to that maybe when my workload is lighter or maybe when I have some assistance. That's okay. Hopefully by the end of today, you'll all be comfortable enough that you'll look at the documentation and you'll walk away with something that you can actually start playing around with, if not using soon. So we're going to get familiar. What is an API? Then we're going to talk about the Ex Libris API Center. I've actually, when I sat in, we went live with Ex Libris, Alma Primo, just over a year ago. And when I was sitting in on the implementation as a developer, and they were going over, and there was that section where they go over the API Center, I was amazed that you could just go in there and play around with things. It was actually pretty cool. So as a developer, I was thinking of all these things we could do. Postman. Postman's an app that I'm going to show you. It's something that you can really get started in playing with APIs, not just Alma and Ex Libris APIs, but pretty much any API out there that you can find. And then we're going to go over security, aka Officer Buzzkill. You come away from a conference, you've got these great ideas, you talk to your IT people, and they say, yes, but. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then again, I'm not going to let you walk away with nothing. We're going to go over a little bit of a framework to help get you started. So what is an API? Oh, I forgot to mention, the University of St. Thomas, we're located in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have campuses in Minneapolis as well as St. Paul, Rome, Italy, but I don't ever get to go there. So an API is Application Program Interface. That's what API stands for. So to put it simply, it's data that one application can request from another. So one server, one application can request data from another. In the past, that was database. You had to write SQL and all that sort of stuff. So you got your script, written Python, PHP, whatever, JavaScript, doesn't really matter. It makes a request to the Ex Libris server, says, there's a key of some sort. I need data on user 1005783. Ex Libris servers say, okay, name, it's Charlie Brown. Here's all his information, loans, fines, all that sort of stuff. So the server then gives back a response. That's very different if you've ever worked with SQL, database connections and stuff like that. It's a simple request. How simple? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. So ways that you can use this to enhance user services. You no longer need to rely on vendors to deliver a custom user interface. You can start creating things on your own. You'll typically use the vendor's interface, for the main part. We still use Primo, of course. But there's some widgets and stuff that we can actually present to the user in our own style, in our own interface, with the data that they need, with no extra data. RSS feeds are still strong but limited. So many of you have probably worked in the past with RSS feeds. Maybe you've used a library thing to parse out library feeds, maybe display new books, stuff like that on your website. APIs are just, you can kind of think of them like an RSS feed. It's a feed of information that you can request. But I think it's more robust. Also, you can bring the data to where your patrons are in portals. If you have a university portal, which I think a lot of universities are going to nowadays, you certainly have that. Your own website, and even new and bold places like voice and chat assistants. So APIs have a lot of information that you can access and display. One thing that we're kicking around, we haven't started this yet, but Streamline the book request process. We're a member of a consortium, about 6 other colleges in the Twin Cities area. So our students can request books. Sometimes, if a student goes to the website, we don't have a book, but one of our other colleagues do down the road. They can request it from there and then, of course, get it. Everybody is familiar with resource sharing. Then also interlibrary loan. But right now in Primo, there's 3 separate buttons, and it's up to the user to figure out what they want to do. What if on the back end, they hit request, and the system was able to kind of figure out on its own using like a decision tree? The system was able to say, well, is this book available locally, in-house? Is it available down the street? Or should I start filling out an interlibrary loan request for this? So those are things that you can use APIs for. So if you've never seen an API, you've probably all seen HTML by now. So the first time, think about the first time you saw something like this. What do you think? Were you like, what the heck? If I stare at it long enough, maybe like one of those 3D, pictures, where like you stare and you back away from them after a little while, you kind of start making out what it is. But now, probably, most of you are probably already familiar. You look at this, and you might even actually visualize the page. There's a large, big, bold headline up. This is Hello World. There's a paragraph. There's an image. And we all have the image of this in our head, don't we? The little guy, shoveling under construction. And then a link, of course, to About Me. You didn't know that probably the first time you saw this code, but now you can already visualize it years later. Hopefully, by the end of today, you're going to be able to look at an API response and be like, oh yes, I know what those fields mean. I know exactly how this is. So, here's a data response. Hello world. It's pretty simple. It's a text string. Hello world. You'll notice it's kind of in a markup language, not like the tags that you saw with the HTML, but you'll see the brackets. And then, of course, you'll see the quotes, denoting it's a string. Each of you right now can go into your phone or a browser. You can type in this URL, and you will get that. That is an API request right now that you can make from your phone. Here's another example. Can anybody tell what this is? You're getting ahead, but yes, it is an array. It's a list. There are 3 strings there. It's an array of 3 items. It's a list, banana, apples, oranges. And if you think in arrays, banana, apples, oranges, of course, you're starting with index number 0, because that's how arrays always work. These APIs can be returned in JSON format. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, but it can be used, don't let that fool you, it can be used for PHP, Python, all of that. So the great thing about it being in arrays is that it's easily parsed into things. Now, you can return it as XML. You can. If you love working with XML and parsing it, you can certainly do that. Now you're probably wondering what these little codes are down here. That URL I gave you at the beginning, api.chatclick.net/UMWUG. If you type in that URL add a question mark, code equals this 3-letter code, you'll get these examples. So throughout this presentation, there's going to be a little code down here. You just write down that URL once, and when you go back and you start like playing around, right here's a list of 3 items you can play with. You can make a request, an API request on your own computer, on your own phone. Make a request, and then you can figure out, okay, how do I do a for loop to display this as a bulleted list, maybe on a web page. So I'm giving you examples to play with. So yeah, the 3-letter code's right down there. So that's what you'll be writing down. This will be much easier than having to write down all the URLs in this thing. Just write down the 3-letter codes, and you'll be able to go back to those later. So data response example number 3, now we're getting a little bit more complicated. We know it's an array, but what is this? What's it an array of? Patrons. Patron or patrons? Patrons. Yep, there's 2 records here. You'll notice the commas are important. Commas kind of help, denote this is one item, this is another item. Sometimes the items are named. Name, Linus. Name, Charlie Brown. ID. Sometimes they're just an array without a name. We won't worry about that too much right now. Here's an array within the array within the array. So yeah, it's a multi-level array. Once you get this into your program, you can pretty much access it like any other array. Record 0, his ID number, his fines. Charlie has not been good returning his books. Name, ID, fines. What loans he's got out. He must be getting ready for the Christmas pageant. So, to request a response, you use a URL. Yes, no database connections. You don't need to worry about that. You just open up any browser and you can do that. I noticed in the past few days, this differs between whether I'm at home or at work, depending on which version of Firefox I'm using. Firefox, actually, if you start entering in URLs and getting arrays, it puts it out nicely in a nice little kind of stylized sheet. Where you can actually see the arrays very nicely rather than just one long text string. So browsers are even starting to show it just like they do RSS feeds, colored and stuff like that. So just as you would request a web page and you look at the source code there, you would request a API and you get back information. So what do we do with it? Well, let's go back to the patron record. So let's just request one patron record. So now we're just going to look at Linus. Well, you can take that, use some sort of scripting, PHP, Python, whatnot. You can put it into HTML code. And then once you got it in HTML code, you put it on the web page. Live example, 1 St. Thomas. This is our university's portal. That just went live last October, so it's a year old. And we were working with the web developers and stuff, and we were like, okay, loaned item, hold requests, fees, and fines. Those are easy APIs that we can request from Alma. Why don't we go ahead and we list these? So here I've got 2 library loans. I have a hold request. I requested an item from college down the street. It's been delivered. It's ready for pickup. It lets me know that as a student. And I have fees. I must have lost the book. This shows up right above dining services, which is a very popular thing. Students want to know how many meals they have left on their account. Well, they can also see the library stuff. This does not show up if they don't have any actions. Also, the nice thing is that they can click on an item and they can renew it. I'll show you. So here's 1 St. Thomas. Right now I have only loans. I don't have any holds right now. Let's say that I want to renew one of my items. I can certainly click on it. And then it takes me right into Primo. We didn't create a brand new account page. We just used what's already existing. But what we did was we gave students another way, and faculty members another way in by listing things that were relevant to them. And then as you can see here, I can like click on the items and do all that good Primo stuff. So it must take me weeks to do that, right? No. Actually, I did not code any of that. This was one of the great things where I just went to our IT people and said, hey, guess what? I have this great idea for the brand new portal that you're trying to get everybody to use. Let's give them something to use. So they said, what? And I said, what if we let the users know when the book was available, so see what they had checked out so that they could renew stuff, and if they had any fines. Fines was a big thing, because you don't really know. I mean, I don't have any books checked out right now. Maybe I returned something late, but do I have any fines? I don't know. I'm not going to go look. But gosh, I'm looking at my dining services, and I got 5 meals left this week. Oh, and I also have fines at the library? They thought it was a brilliant idea. They bowed down to me. I don't even know what language they used. Probably PHP, Java, who knows what. I don't know what the portal uses. And I don't really care. I just simply gave them 3 lines of API code. That's all I did. I gave them 3 URLs. You know who the user is because they're logged into the portal. This is where you stick their ID number in this URL. This is where you stick that in the URL. And this is the information that you get back. I said, you know, the records are in this format. You'll see the name field. You'll see the fines field. You'll see the holds field. You'll see where it's available for pickup. This is the wording we want. And they went ahead and they did it. So it's great to have those partnerships. And I basically got the lines of code from the little bird who told me so. Actually, no. I got it from the Ex Libris API Center. Again, it's a great resource. So to get started with the API Center, you need to create your account. You need to generate an API key, and then you just need to play around. Now, if you have authorization, of course, that's a key thing. So who in your library holds the keys to creating that developer account for you? Maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else. Take them out for coffee. Tell them, hey, you know what? I've been playing around with APIs a little bit. I'd like to start playing around with the Alma APIs and see what we can do for our students and for our patrons. So get yourself an account. Then you can go to Ex Libris Developers Network. And then we can go into the applications area and start creating a key, start playing around with the APIs. So if you need the link later on, of course, it's on the Ex Libris website, but it's dev. So generating a key. So once you have an account, you'll need to generate a key. As you see, we have multiple keys. We have multiple applications. Security best practice, I have a background in information security. So security best practices are create a new key for each application you're creating. What if that application gets compromised? What if one of the developers, and we kind of had this happen, during development phase, we were emailing back and forth. For some reason, the API key got into the email because I think they were saying, hey, this API request is not working. How do I fix it? And the API key was in the request. And then all of a sudden, it got forwarded on to all the developers in the group, some of them student workers. And I'm like, okay, I need to shut down that API key right now. So I shut it down. You can delete these and recreate keys at any time. Suppose you're like, we don't use Spinomatic anymore, so let's get rid of that one. We don't need to worry about that. This is also a nice list to let you know what applications you have out there. Because the next person who comes in is probably going to wonder, how many applications do we have using keys? What do I need to keep track of? This is a great spot. So go ahead, try not to reuse keys for different, just like passwords, don't use the same one over and over and over again. Create different ones. So to create an application, they call it application, you're not really creating an application, you're creating an application key, really. Click on Add Application underneath this list here. So when you're adding an application, you're going to see this dialog box. The first tab is application information. Give it a name. Something, of course, that helps you remember what it's about. If you need more information, you can put into the description. Maybe even say who the owners of this application are. If you have questions about this application, where does it reside? Give some information to kind of help you out. Platform, you're going to see a list like, is it going to be a mobile app? Is it going to be a web platform? Is it going to be a server thing? Just figure out whatever best suits your needs for that. Then you're going to click over to the next tab for API management, and you're going to add your APIs. Now, this is, bibs have a separate API than users. So if you're doing just users, you can just use the user one. You don't need to add a whole bunch of them. You probably don't want to add a whole bunch because you want to limit the exposure that each application has. So the users API actually has a lot of information that was able to, we just had to add the users API to that one St. Thomas to our portal thing. We didn't need to do anything with bibs. The great thing is that when you get a user's loans, they're fully featured. They already have the name of the book, who it was by, and all that book information. So we only needed the user API to call that up. We didn't really need to add bibs or anything like that. Now the weird thing is that after you save it, you got to go back in and edit. Click into this API management tab, and then you can change it from sandbox read-only to prod read-only, so production read-only, so your production instance of Alma or Primo. And you have the option between read-only and write and read. Primarily, you're going to be doing read-only unless you're performing actions. And when you're performing actions, that means that you've dealt with APIs long enough that you know how they work. You already have a user portal that you can password protect, that only users are creating actions, like creating their own holds, their own requests, stuff like that, or renewing items. So primarily, you're going to be doing read-only. So be careful about write. So then to play, you go back to this list of all the applications, and Alma has this great API console that really lets you just get in there. You can choose your API that you're going to use. So users, then you're going to choose a resource. When you look at APIs, and I'll show you the documentation in a moment, there's many things you can do. So right now, I choose loans. You can also choose other things as well. Method is primarily get. Then you fill in things like, well, you need to test against a user. This user ID is typically your own, because you're going to test against yourself. Or if you guys have fake accounts or dummy accounts, you can certainly use that. Or colleagues that you have permissions to. Hey, we're testing this. I know you have 3 loans out. Can we see that? Format. Now this is the key thing here. If you add a parameter with the name of format, type in JSON. Otherwise, you're going to get back XML. If you want XML, that's great. I like to work with JSON data. So if you type in JSON here, you're going to get the format that I've been showing you so far in this presentation. Step number 6, go up there and you choose that API key that you created. So that we went through those steps earlier. Go ahead and create the libweb test. Choose authentication. From that list, you just choose API key. And then you execute the request. And then you get back data, and it shows this up on the web page. You get back data, it looks great, looks formatted, you got it, but now what? Well, there's a query tab where you can go into the query tab, and you can get that URL. And then you can put that into whatever program you're working in. But there's more. Code samples. So you want to know how to get started? Well, here's how you get started with Python. Bring up your Python console if you've got Python running on your machine. You can do a GET request by using this code here, and then all of a sudden you can work with APIs on your machine and play around with it. I don't know why. I don't know if I have something up in my profile, but whenever I do This on the developers network, I'm always in the EU. I don't know why, but whenever I actually get the code, it's not in the EU. So if it says EU, just change that to NA. You've got PHP as well. So you've got PHP to code to get started. We have curl, and we have JavaScript. No. Do not use JavaScript for Alma, Primo, Ex Libris APIs, because you have to use a key, an API key, to access them. That's like using your password. Imagine if to access your email account, you did your username in the URL, and then you did ampersand, password equals, blah, and you posted that out there on the web. It's the same thing. Do not use JavaScript for Alma APIs. You must never use JavaScript for Ex Libris APIs, never. Now, JavaScript accessing APIs is fine for other things like public information, blog posts, blog feeds, stuff like that, great. But never, ever use it for this. There's ways that you can get around that. I'll get to that in a moment. So documentation. So you need to know what fields are available and how to make requests. For example, we'll go to the users. So here's the user API. So we got the user. You can get the user's requests. You can get the user's loans, resource sharing requests, fines, fees, deposits. Down here, you're going to start seeing those URLs. So of course, the first part of this is API-NA Ex Libris group, blah, 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 / Alma WS V1 users, stuff like that. And when you click into these, you get more documentation. You'll be able to see what parameters you can fill in. You'll be able to see, did I not click? You'll be able to see what parameters to fill in. You'll be able to see what data it expects. And then you'll be able to play around. If you were logged into the developers network, there would be a spot there to play around with that screen that I showed you earlier, being able to put in the parameters and find the query code and stuff like that. So Postman. Now this is an application that is freely available. You can download it. They make it for Macintosh. They make it for Windows as well as Linux. It's a great browser, but it's for APIs. So that URL that we used earlier, api.chadclook.net/UMWUG, we're going to use that in Postman. So if you have Postman available to you, you can certainly bring that up. Or you can do this when you get home, because these slides, of course, will be available. So you can download Postman from www.getpostman.com and install it. At the time I installed it, it did not need administrative privileges to install. I noticed that just on my Mac a few days ago, it did an update and it said, hey, guess what? We're a real application now. If you want future updates, install this as an admin. So basically, then I just type in the admin password and stuff like that. So I don't know if it's true anymore that it's a standalone application. I think it actually needs to be installed as an app now. But the great thing about Postman is you type it into like the URL bar, you hit send, and you get your data back. Nice and formatted, and you can actually kind of start reading it a little bit rather than just the weird stuff that you get in a browser. Another thing, you can add parameters. So you click on the little parameters button, and you can start adding code, key, stuff like that, and it automatically starts adding stuff in here. You can take a full-fledged URL with the query string on it, paste it in here, and then it fills that out as well. It goes both ways. It's great to play around with. So if we went ahead and we typed in one of those, oh yeah, so if you were to use CPE for the value for the code, you would get something like this. And then you could also go ahead and you could change a CPE, where the code equals. You could change it to be a U, LVP, CBL. You get those other code examples as well. And you can just play around with that like all day, like find other APIs on the web and just see what you can see and see the visualization of the data. So you got to be careful when you're playing around, because if you're doing a get, you're safe. You're just reading information. If you start doing deletes and posts and puts, guess what you're doing? You're deleting and you're putting information up there. As long as you, if you have read-only APIs, well, they're not going to execute, so that's not a big deal. But be careful if you do have read-write access. And this is where provisioning the keys is important. Maybe for your Postman, when you're playing around with applications, you have a different API key. You're not using production keys. So these, of course, I don't expect you to write down all at once. Again, you can get them through here, or when you get back home. So I'm providing 3 examples right here. So that portal example, those API requests that I sent to our IT people, these are the 3 URLs that I sent them. And I sent them information. I said, you know what? User ID goes there. There's the API key. We just fill in this information, and this is what you're going to use. Use whatever code you want to use. These are the 3 things. So feel free to take those, go back, and you can start developing. And then we have environment variables. So that every time we don't have to fill in CPE, or we don't have to fill in the user ID or anything like that. We can actually have environment variable. I can save my own user ID. And then when I do this, I just type in variable names, and then it fills in that information on its own. And I can flip between variables if I have 3 users or 3 books. Because I tell you what, MMS IDs, nobody just remembers those off the top of their head to test with. So pick your favorite book. Save it as an environment variable. That way when you're doing bibs, you can just use that environment variable and boom, it just automatically sticks that book in there. You can manage and add environment variables. You can have sets of environment variables. So I have one for demos. I have one for a chat bot that we were playing around with. We can make one for what we're creating here. You just have a whole bunch of them. And the great thing is that you can just switch between them by just doing drop down, and all of a sudden you can just switch between them. And if you're like, well, what are the current values? You just click on the little I, and then it will tell you what the current values for your environment are. Postman is fully featured and it is free. As I said, you can save multiple variable sets. You can organize your requests in folders. And if you create an account, you can actually have a cloud. So that way, if you move between a Mac or home or PC or whatnot, all your information is there. And as I said, you can organize them in folders and subfolders and stuff like that, so you can keep things organized. So if you have your Ex Libris APIs, your SpringShare APIs, or other APIs, you can keep them all separate. Or if you're working on a project, you can say, these are the APIs I'm using for this project. And one more thing, code snippets. We all like code snippets. So if you click on code, you have Python, you have PHP, curl, JavaScript, or maybe. Right here, I'm not using a Alma API or a Ex Libris API, so this is probably safe, right? So don't use JavaScript again for Ex Libris APIs. There are exceptions, not for Alma APIs, but there are exceptions. So we're going to get to that next, AKA Officer Buzzkill, security. So I developed this 4-point security checklist, and I recently had to give this to some student workers in the law library before I gave them access, not to Alma APIs, but to another API set through SpringShare, which is less personal. Are we exposing sensitive data in the API request? Such as, are we exposing personal information? Are we exposing IDs that can be traversed in reverse? I'll get to that. Do we have any secrets like an API key or access tokens? Does it have the potential to return any of that information? Even though the request itself is not sensitive, does it return any sensitive information? So you got to think about that. Now I put this picture up here because back in 1965, St. Thomas was an all-men's college, and we had a sister college down the street which was an all-women's. The men and the women each filled out a questionnaire of their interests. They fed it, well, somebody had to type up the punch cards first, fed it into the computer, which you can kind of see right there, the control data, and then it would produce matches for a dance. Personal information questionnaire matches sounds a little bit like a lot of the online profiles that we see nowadays. And what do you hear about? Well, nobody really had access to the passwords, but they figured out what cookie this person was able to use, or a security token by saying, well, view it as so-and-so. All of a sudden, we have user information supposedly going out in public. Anybody know about the Google Plus hack recently? It appears that for like a year, there was a way that people were able to get access to other Google Plus profiles of personal information that people had marked private. However, Google says, we don't think anybody looked at that. Well, great, but does that give you confidence? If you have your API key out there and you can say, well, I know with confidence nobody actually used that API key, is Zach still going to appease your general counsel? No. So with API keys, you've got to be careful. So think about what you're returning. If you answer yes to any of these questions, then you need to implement the request server side. And I'll get to that in a moment. And of course, all Ex Libris APIs will have an answer of yes. So let's look at this one. Here's a request. Is there any personal information in that request? Anything identifying a user? No. Does it reveal any IDs that can be traversed in reverse? I'm just going to say no right now because I'll get to what that means in a moment. Does it contain secrets like an API key? It has a code, but that's a public code. I'm giving that to you. So no, there's no API key. Does it return any of the above? No, it's just a list of games. So it's approved. You can use JavaScript for this one. That's fine, no big deal. Let's look at this example. Code CBL. The request does not contain any personal info, no IDs that can be traversed in reverse, no API key. Does it return any of the above? Yes. It seems pretty simple, but then all of a sudden we've got user information. So no, this would not be approved for JavaScript. Example number 3, loans. Well, gosh, now we're really getting into it. Yeah, I mean, there's an API key, stuff like that. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Do not use JavaScript. Now, this one is public information, really. No personal information. We're talking about a bib record. The books don't have privacy concerns. So we're not worried about that book. It's not a secret. Does it reveal IDs that can be traversed in reverse? I haven't explained what that is yet, so I don't really know. Does it contain an API key? No. Nope, there's no API key in that. Does it return any of the above? No. This is all book stuff. It's an open book. But you slap a /loans on the end of that URL request, and all of a sudden you have what loans are out with personal information about the users. So even though this seemed very safe, you just do one thing, modify that URL, not you, but I don't want to call them a hacker, but somebody with too much time on their hands, all of a sudden they know where the loans are. Then you might say, now who's checking every single bib record to see if there's any loans out? Again, doesn't matter when people find out. All you can do is /loans. It doesn't matter. So no, this would, again, not be a good one to use. So API best practices: never reveal secrets, never place secrets in the client's hands, JavaScript in browser, URLs, post requests, compiled code in a mobile app. This is where I see some beginning computer science students get into trouble, and even you see this out in the real world. They think, oh, I coded within an app, I hard-coded it, it's in the compiled code, nobody's going to see it. They will find it. Somebody's going to reverse engineer it, and they'll find it. That's just the way it is. And even if they don't, it doesn't matter because you put it in somebody else's hands. So anything in the client's hands is able to be reverse engineered, and revealing the key to somebody makes them look at it and think, huh, I wonder what this opens. Now, we've all had that door in the library, right, where you're like, I wonder where that goes, I wonder what that does. You've walked past it a few times, like, gosh, I wonder what it does. And you wonder if the key saying trusted you opens it. So one day you walk over there, you put your key in the handle, maybe you got to jiggle it a little bit, try to make it work, and it works. It opens the door, and you look in. It's not too spectacular. Actually, it's a heat pipe. It's very hot. You can't really store cooler beer or anything down there, and I wouldn't hide down there either. It's too hot. But you wonder, am I really supposed to have a key to this? And then you just quietly close it. You walk away. Try not to think about it. You don't want to tell anybody. You don't want to get in trouble. But then every once in a while, you walk past the door and you'll be like, gosh, I wonder if I can still open it. And sure enough, you can. Nobody figured it out yet. You still have access. And then one day, you'll be like, you know what? I have the urge to brag about this. I'm a pretty cool guy. Maybe I had too much at the reception last night. And I want to tell everybody, maybe at a conference, that, hey, I found this door. And I actually have a key for it. I don't think I'm supposed to, but hey, it was pretty cool. You feel pretty good, don't you? A little superior? You know what it's like to be a hacker. You didn't really do anything wrong. You're just curious. You were bored one day. So the problem with the Ex Libris API isn't really a problem. The problem is that it's so flexible and that you can use it for a lot of things. It's not really a problem. It's an API key based and therefore meant to be used server to server. It's like a password. It is a key that opens many doors, even ones that you don't consider. I'm sure nobody knows that most library staff have access to that door for some reason. An API key, even one provision for just bibs, allows somebody to poke around. Again, bib records have user information in them if you slap that slash loans on there. So it's up to you to develop a secure public interface. Now, when can you use public side API calls? It's like JavaScript, stuff like that. You can use it for public feeds like blog posts, event calendars, new book lists. That's fine. At St. Thomas Libraries, we use JavaScript API calls for lots of things. Our libcal events, blog posts, all that sort of stuff. Anything that is requesting information from Alma that we're posting publicly on our website through JavaScript, we have an intermediary script basically that holds the API key, does the requests, and returns only the information back to the JavaScript requesting it that's necessary for that request. Oh, we also make sure that our APIs are only accessed from the stthomas.edu website, so pages that are hosted by stthomas.edu. Now, don't confuse this with IP restrictions. Basically, when an object or an image or something appears on a web page that your client browser requested that from a server and it said what page it's coming from, we make sure of that. Not because we're worried that Hamlin or another university down the road is going to steal our stuff. It's just denial of service attacks or just those API calls. We don't just want a whole bunch of fake websites pretending to be us and using up our API requests. So our JavaScript on our home page could say something like, now this is all imaginary, we don't actually have this. Instead of going to the Ex Libris servers, we go to an intermediary server. No personal information in this, no access key. And we do everything server side. So, web page, this is our server. It gets this is where it resides. It gets the request to list courses. This is pseudocode, so don't try coding it. It gets the parameters. The parameter is list equals all. It makes a request to, or it formulates, it plugs in the API key, plugs in the parameters, gets going to call Ex Libris. And we have a we have a pre-made function basically that does that for us, and I'll show you that at the end here. And so then it goes from our server to Ex Libris, makes a request with the API key, all that. It gets all the information, all the secret information, all that sort of stuff back, parses it out, and it sends back only what's necessary. For this example, we're only going to do two things. We're going to do ID encode, or title encode. We're not going to worry about who the instructor is or anything like that, or any other information. This is pretty public information, so that's safe to return back. So we can do a live demo. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's information on GitHub. So I will have this available on GitHub. Pretty much all the code that you've seen here today is available on GitHub, either through that URL that I gave you earlier with those codes, or I'm going to give you the codes in the back. So like this example web page is available on GitHub, as well as the API information that calls that. Now you probably didn't see this because it happened so quickly, but this page loads. Yeah, it happened so quickly. This page loads, and this is actually JavaScript calling to a middle server. That middle server is then calling to Ex Libris, getting information back, passing it back to the JavaScript, and JavaScript is then creating that there. So yeah, that's a lot of coding. But I have some good news. As I mentioned a few times, the code's available. I've developed a framework for a few things. Frameworks, templates, however you want to call it. I don't really want to call it too much of a framework because it's not like Bootstrap or anything like that. It's basically a template. You download it. You already have functions that can call APIs, parse it out, return it. You can generate your own APIs. That one example, api.chatcloak.net/UMWUG, that's an API that I developed. And I was just using the same framework. So you can return data. You don't even need to be requesting it from another server. We have a dashboard, for example, that says how many loans we processed last month. I manually enter that into like a JSON file, and then we just return that that way. So it's pretty static, but you can pretty much develop APIs for anything. You can combine APIs too, if you want to pull from a few different systems. So we have a framework. Now the framework is written in PHP, and you do have to host it somewhere. Or if you're using something like Drupal or something like that that uses PHP, or WordPress that uses PHP, and you have access to like work with the templates and all that, then you can just use a PHP code and put it into your own thing there too. So if you can't have your own IT group provision a server, there are other options as long as you're allowed to host your code elsewhere. Oh yeah, I was hosting this website on Dropbox, and I just found out that it was publicly available to everybody. Your general counsel is not going to be happy about that. So make sure you're making good decisions. We use Amazon Web Services as well as Microsoft. I don't know how that works, but we use both. I mean, when I say we use both, the campus uses both. The campus is moving all servers off campus, except for maybe like one or two. And we're using Amazon Web Services to host stuff. So our stuff is actually stored in Amazon Web Services. Microsoft has options, and Google Sheets also has options, as well as other database, not database, but other ways that you can store data and recall data. And you'll find other API options out there as well. But be careful, of course, you don't want to host with somebody who's prone to hacks. You want to go with a reputable company. And you don't want to be storing sensitive data where you shouldn't. Whoever you're storing with needs to have like a business, non-disclosure, confidentiality, stuff like that. They need to be set up to handle business accounts where they're not storing data, using it for other purposes, stuff like that. So you got to be careful. So vet your hosting provider. Don't go back and say, well, Chad said it's okay for me to host this on DreamHost or Dropbox or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. So anywhere you can run server-side scripts to create a data set and then utilize a public API from that is a great spot. And again, Drupal, WordPress, AWS. AWS, you don't even need to host scripts. They have like Lambda, where you can send a request and it just on the fly just does a script or something like that. I haven't worked with it, but it is available. But you need to be careful because API requests take time and delay loading of a web page. You're loading an asset. So if you have I'm going to request courses. I want to look up what instructors that course has. I want to look up their course list. I want to load all that in. Your page is going to stop loading. Make all those API requests, and then when it's finished doing all those 15 API requests, whatnot, then it's going to load. That's why we actually use JavaScript. So we use that intermediary to make the request. Because the page will load, JavaScript will be running, waiting for the API request in the background. But the page will already be loaded. Then all of a sudden, whoop, it'll fill that information in. So there's a lot of GitHub code out there. So there's a lot of code on GitHub out there. But this will help you get you started. I think one of the problems that I had getting started with APIs was like, yeah, here's a cool thing I want to do. You go out there and you're like, oh my God, I need to know what Docker is. I need to know what this is. It's hard to get started so that when you do start using those applications, you know where to look and what to modify and what to work with. So I have 2 repositories listed up here. GitHub.com/UST libraries. So anything that's library specific that I code on company time basically is there. Anything that I maintain on my own, I actually am a geek. I maintain my own code, even if I know I'm doing it on my own time, but I know it'll make my job easier at work. So at night, I'll just create a template or something like that. If I know that I'm going to reuse it for my own personal use as well, I'll just spend time coding it and maintaining it. So the framework, I developed it to quickly deploy APIs in microsites. I found out that once I got started coding APIs, there were a lot of APIs to do. There was a lot of things I could do. I started using the same code over and over again. I'd modify it, get out of date. I find better ways, more efficient ways of coding. Then all of a sudden I have 15 APIs out there, 15 different code bases. It's like, gosh, what the heck? So I started modularizing the code a little bit so that all I had to do, I had one config file, and then I have the main core file for this specific application. But then all the functions that are used amongst all of them, they're all separate. That way, if I ever do an update, I'm like, okay, yes, you know what? That's a security problem. I'm going to now deploy this code, and it's going to fix everything else. That way, I'm not having to copy and paste a whole bunch of stuff. So here's 2 here. So the project framework is available. It's, again, written in PHP. This here uses the framework, but it's demonstrating what I already demonstrated. So you can actually go see what a working example is. And you can actually play with a working example. I also have a JavaScript template. So for those public APIs, I have a JavaScript template, which already has the functions that you need to make an API call, and then to display that code. And it's also got some debugging. Oh, the framework also has debugging stuff as well in it, and you can secure that as well. But it's got some debugging stuff that will display what it's doing. Hey, I'm doing this now in the console. I made the API request. It'll display play-by-play in the console, and however you want to code that, if you want it play-by-play in the developer's console. If you want a quick JavaScript request and response, I have an 8-ball. Ask the 8-ball a yes or no question, and then click to reveal the answer. What should I ask? Anybody? Come on. Is my presentation a success? Now, be warned, some questions are best left unasked. So let's see what it says. Now, this is, yeah, you could script this on the web page. But this is actually making good. But this is actually making an API call in the background. Now, one thing that I love about the modern browsers, and I wish I had this when I started coding, because it would have saved me a lot of headaches, is the inspect view. You can actually get a play-by-play as to what's going on. And if you look, so I'm going to click, and you're going to see something pop up here. That is the API call. So I'm going to click here. Is my presentation a success? Hopefully it says somewhat similar. It's making the request. You saw this pop up here. It made a call. Don't count on it. I somehow went downhill. Which is which? There we go. There's the API request. This is what was returned by a different server. This actually went out to api.chatcloak.net. It asked for a response. That code there generated a random response based upon the universe, and it sent this back. One thing about the API is nice is that even though I could have done all that in JavaScript, I could have done the random number in JavaScript, a hacker could have come in and just change it for his own good. Well, they can't really mess with the response if your response is coming from a different server. I mean, they still could, but they can't screw with the number generator. So that's another example if you just kind of want to just like go through the code. And again, that's available on GitHub. Again, these examples are just for you to like go through, play around with, see how APIs work. And a final piece of code. The little numbers that were showing up down here, that code's available on GitHub too. If you happen to go to that URL during the presentation, it's the api.chatcloak.net/UMWUG, and you were able to get the code snippets. All that is available here too. And again, it's using the same framework, so then you can play around, see how that works. Once you see how something works, I mean, that's a fun of coding that I think, is that you can actually like go out there, see what other people have done, dissect it, see how they did it, and then use it for your own. So what's next? Even if you can't set up a server environment, I know, it happens. It took me a year before I saw my first API presentation before I actually like started playing around with it. I'd be a lot further along if I would have just started playing right away, if I had examples. So understand what is available. So if you're like, gosh, you know what, I just asked my supervisor, he still won't give me access, or she won't give me access, well, play with other APIs. Use Postman. Play around with the APIs. Get to know what they're doing. Because I tell you what, when you start coding something, you come back a year later and you're like, gosh, I totally did that wrong. Make those mistakes now, before you get those keys, before you actually get access. That way, when you actually do have access, you're doing it right. So this time next year, I want you to proposition your supervisor or whoever for a place to host your APIs, so that way you can start developing APIs for your patrons and enhance your user services. Thank you. Any questions? We have 2 minutes. Now, when this presentation is posted to the UMWUG website, I have some additional bonus pieces of code as well, some 5 extra things that you can look at. So if there's any questions, you can feel free to ask now. We have like 2 minutes or so, and then I think we have a break, or maybe not. But then I can stick around too. So thank you.